usually on a daily basis. If not my own, others. I'm going to repeat that sentence. In my ministry, I encounter tears usually daily as a chaplain. If not my own, others' tears. These expressions of feeling, however, are often not welcomed with bursts of enthusiasm or enveloping hugs. Instead, they're replaced by a kind of deep gulp, as if being swallowed up inside by the person. You know, the kind that you got something stuck in here and it kind of, you just suck it up, is what the young people would call it. Another way that tears have been managed that I've noticed is that the person abruptly turns away, sort of like that, or this way. And out of their cuff, or their pocket, or something, or even not out of their cuff, but their cuff, is used to enjoy the presence of the tear rather than another human being see or experience that presence. In actuality, in our culture, we know diddly about tears. Very few people have actually studied their existence. It's truly open for exploration. So all of you out there who want to have a project, wide open field, the study of tears. You go for it. And as we heard from our younger folks this morning, there is a difference between drops of water and tears. So this day, while I am with you, I want to replicate the Time for All Ages with an adult twist. Besides our absolutely infatuating music this day, and the story of pink tears, and our reading, which Carla did so beautifully, there are two scholars who've been studying tears internationally. Lauren Bilsma at the University of Pittsburgh and Ad Vingerholt from Tilburg University in the Netherlands. Now, Lauren notes in her one of bazillion articles that she's written on tears, crying as well as other sorts of intense emotional experience can help us highlight what's important and what we need to focus upon. Crying is a way to elicit support from others during times of distress. Dr. Vingerholt, after suggesting that the study of tears is still in its infancy, stated that tears are critical for care, for protection, and for deep loving. And one of the other footnotes that he put in one of his papers was that many religious early cultures considered we, humans, are what was used of God's tears. So we're God's tears in human form. The two scholars have also delineated that all tears are not created equal. Some tears are called basal tears, and they exist to lubricate, nourish, and protect our eyes. Then there's another level of tears called reflex tears. And these tears form to protect our eyes from irritants like the wind and smoke and onions in our kitchen when we're cooking soup. The third kind of tears are labeled emotional tears. Emotional tears in chemical deciphering contain more protein than any of the other kinds of tears at all. And all three types of tears are chemically different from each other. Today, in my sharing with you, I'm choosing to acknowledge that while several theories abound about tears, where they come from, their actual purposes, what they're made up of, their chemical composition, etc., no matter what they are or are composed of, they are gifts. We have the ability to share with each other. So I'm going to include a little impromptu investigating with you this morning into tears. And I'm going to do that by walking you through 3 short stories about them and see how you feel about them in each scenario. Does that sound like a quality use of our time? Does someone have the demographic notebooks out to take track of? I just checked. I've been working in the medical area too long. Okay, my question for you this morning is, how many of you, honestly, and all you got to do is raise your hand here, how many of you have shoved back tears in your lifetime thus far? Oh my! Not a one that didn't do it. Interesting. So my question, which is rhetorical, is why do you do that? My first story to share with you, which answers maybe that question, comes from a doctor who lives on an island. The doctor's name is Dr. Bartolo, and he was born into a family of fishermen. Sounds like a Nazarene I learned about sometime back. He now runs the lone medical clinic on Lampedusa, which is an island situated 100 miles off Italy's southern coast. He is known as the migrant doctor. He and his clinic welcome at his port of call thousands of African and Middle Eastern refugees by boat, by dinghy, by canoe, by blown up bubbles. In his book describing his life and work titled Tears of Salt, he writes, quote, "These poor people have seen it all, not least the fear of crossing the Mediterranean. They have faced death multiple times, and when they arrive on my dock, they fear more violence here as well. And so we, out there on the island's pier, which I call my first home, together with other colleagues and volunteers from the island and law enforcement, we make them understand right away that this land is good and this island won't hurt them. We do it with a caress, a smile, a cup of hot tea, a thermal blanket, and even just a pat on the back. And they understand that they've arrived among good people after having suffered every kind of violence you can even think of. Europe, he writes, should start looking at these migrants as people, human beings. But Europe only talks about numbers and an invasion. Sometimes, as this doctor hugs young women who are pregnant because of being raped, or young men who cannot go back to their village because they have been mutilated by those who wish to shame them, Dr. Bartolo's tears flow unstopped. This doctor sheds tears each and every day. Tears, in his book, he admits, as a doctor, he learned to stuff down. But he has found that task now totally impossible. Okay, my next investigative question for you is, does injustice cause you to tear up? Yes or no?
Yes.
Okay. How often does this happen to you? Daily? For me, it's too frequent to count. So here is the next story. This is a story about an ordained minister of 35 years. He's a sociologist, can't talk very much, at Georgetown University these days. But this story is about him as a young father living in Hartford. Why? Yeah. It is a story about tears and another result from tears. His 10-year-old son had just come to visit to see his dad. He was riding in the car with his dad and his dad's new wife, and his son, the visiting son, was being a smarty pants, like only 10-year-olds could be. So Dad tried to get him to get in line. He ignored Dad. Dad kept driving. Dad kept getting angrier. Son kept being more obnoxious. The scenario isn't going to end well, is it? No, it didn't. Dad pulled the car over, gave his son a couple licks on the head, and the boy started crying. Dad got back in the front seat of the car, kept driving down the block. Shortly after driving down the block, there are sirens coming in. They stop the dad in the car. The son is still crying in the back seat. The wife is sitting in the front seat. Police officers get out of the first cruiser, walk up to the window. Dad says, "Good afternoon, officers. What can I do for you? Did I do something wrong?" Officers just stood at the car door, wouldn't answer the question. Dad knew right away when he saw the officers that he better get prepared to assume the correct position when he would be asked to get out of the vehicle, which he was very shortly. In the meantime, there were two officers in the first cruiser. The first officer went to the other side of the car and started asking the wife questions about how she was her husband a nice person, what did the husband do to the son in the back seat. The son in the back seat is now sobbing uncontrollably, saying, "I'm fine. I'm really, really fine. What are you doing to my dad? Why are you doing this to my dad? After the second question, 2 other cruisers pulled up alongside the car. We now have 6 white officers interrogating the young black father with his son and wife in the car. The young African-American man said, "I teach right here. I'm driving to my office. I wanted to show my son the office that I teach in. I'm a professor at Hartford Seminary." And the police officer's response was, "Sure, and I'm John Wayne." The officer then said, "We got a complaint that someone was hurting a child, so we were following it up." The dad said, "I can assure you I love my son, and I wasn't hurting him. I punished my child now so that I wouldn't one day end up being arrested by you," the professor quipped in a snarky way. He regretted his words, hoping that his brief snarkiness wouldn't set off the cop and get him hammered or shot. Second cop looked back over his shoulder as he walked to his cruiser. "We have to check on these things," he said. Then all of them got into their respective cars, offering no apologies whatsoever, and drove away. This is the story that begins a new book that just came out that I highly recommend for you to further your race awareness. It's written by Michael Eric Dyson, titled "Tears We Cannot Stop, a Sermon to White America." Here is my final question for you this day. How do your tears express who you are? What do they express, really? And this story is a personal one. You all know, work at St. Francis Hospital. In the middle of one of the main corridors of St. Francis Hospital is a huge column. Big column. It's got all the signs, the directional signs to the hospital in it. The front is one way, the side is another way, the back is the third way, the other side is another way. One day, a young 8-year-old girl was running round and round and round and round this column. She had a balloon on her arm. But she was having a great time. Running, 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 running. She had more energy than I could shake a stick at, as they say. Her mom eventually found her mom. Her mom was sitting on a chair in the lobby, sitting outside endocrinology. So I got to know the little girl, and I got to know the little girl's mom. Mom was a CNA in study. She was studying. But I got to know the daughter and the granddaughter first. About a week later, I was up on the oncology unit, and I was visiting a patient. Lovely former CNA, dying of cancer. Her hair was braided neatly in rows. She's a beautiful woman. Beautiful woman in her early 60s. And in comes bouncing babe. Runs in. Grandma blows up one of the blue gloves, and they create a balloon. And they play Bounce the Balloon that day. So I got to know that this was an entire family. And Grandma was very proud of her daughter, who was learning to be a CNA. Grandma had been a CNA her entire career. and granddaughter was in love with Grandma. She'd jump on the bed and sit there and play balloon with Grandma. Fast forward about 4 weeks. I was called to another room in the oncology unit because we never know when people are transferred from one place to another. And Grandma was at the bed, and there were 15 people surrounding Grandma. But daughter and granddaughter were nowhere to be found. Somber, sad, knew by walking into the room that there were only a few hours left. In this business, you know when that happens. So, I was there, and I was looking for the granddaughter because I knew 8-year-old would be having some possible issues with Grandma going. In comes bouncing granddaughter. Grandma is in and out of it at this point in time, but she was with it enough to blow up another blue glove. And they bounced the balloon around the entire room of 15. And the little girl said, "Let's play balloon ball, Grandma. We got lots more people to play with now." And Grandma called her over to the side of the bed and had her crawl up next to her. And she whispered to her granddaughter that she was going to be floating with the balloons, like they had talked about the day before. Floating higher and higher. To be with the Creator who created the trees we could see out her window and the flowers that were sitting on her table. Grandma then asked me to pray with everyone. We all joined hands. We prayed. And then we all sang Up, Up, and Away. Grandma died while we were singing. All the stories I shared with you this day are stories that have brought tears. I'd like to review the questions with you that I asked. How many of you have shoved tears down? Why? Does injustice cause you to tear up? How often does that happen to you? What do you do about it? That one wasn't in the first set of questions. I added it just now. What do your tears express? How do you know what they express? The gift of tears makes us vulnerable. And our vulnerability allows us to be open to our own humanness. I call it the humanity of our tears. Tears can certainly be studied, examined, questioned, labeled, cataloged, put on a shelf, put in a petri dish, put in a little tube in the laboratory. My challenge to you this day is, rather than ignite your brain to analyze the tears, I would instead encourage you to passionately engage your heart and celebrate the giftedness of tears. The depth of living that they provide you with. May we always recognize and celebrate the gift that tears provide to us. May it be so. Blessed be.